Welcome back to another episode of 2X, the podcast where I share quick, concise tips for you to help you grow your business twice as fast. So let's dive into this short and quick episode on communication. So number one, when you're communicating, don't be afraid to share and speak about the same thing over and over again, multiple times. And you have to really say it really over and over again, multiple times until people get sick of it before it will really sink into others. Not because people are not listening, but also because sometimes when you say it, people don't pay attention. Sometimes when you put certain things out, it might not get read, it might not get viewed, it might not get listened. So even if you're thinking like, hey, I'm posting the same thing again and again on Facebook, on Twitter, multiple times a day, it is actually okay to do that because not every single time you post gets viewed by the same person over and over again. Tip number two, being authentic. I find this is something that is sort of underestimated in terms of the effectiveness and the power of authenticity. I encourage businesses to be human because at the end of the day, your customers, your clients, they are all people as well. And as a business owner, you are a human that is running a business as well. So be authentic, be yourself. You don't have to confuse, and you don't confuse authenticity with transparency. You don't have to be fully transparent. You don't have to share every single minute detail. And sometimes it might actually make sense to omit certain information because of maybe, let's say, privacy or security reasons, right? So, but be human, be authentic. Talk about some of the emotions behind certain things, how it makes you feel, and don't worry about screwing up. Everyone screws up. Just own up to it and apologize for it if it so happens, rather than hiding mistakes and under communicating. It's much better to over communicate. As you think about mediums of communication, you also want to try to communicate in ways that people are comfortable. Think about how people want to consume content. There are many sort of mediums. Maybe it's a blog, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's videos, maybe it's in-person events, maybe it's webinars, right? Maybe it's a book. So there are many different ways, and explore releasing the information that you're putting out, that you want to put out in those different mediums. You might find that depending on your audience, different mediums might work better, and different mediums may communicate different things better as well. Another thing to be mindful about is as you communicate, you want to try to empathize with what the listener is listening and kind of understand why they ask you certain things or why they don't do certain things if that so happens. So what do they hear in what you say? What is their sentiment? What do they really care about? Because if you're saying one thing and it's being interpreted in a different way, maybe that's because that's the message that they latch onto. So try to understand what are people hearing. It's not so much because you may not be communicating effectively. Maybe you did. It may be that there were certain points that you skimmed over, or maybe there were some points that you didn't emphasize enough, or maybe they don't believe what you're saying and they're looking to validate their perception of the topic that you're discussing. So think about why they are bringing those things up. Like a quick example I can give here is, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're pitching to an investor, and if you notice every time after your pitch that investors tend to ask the same question, then you might want to think about revising your pitch deck or your presentation to address that question. Maybe they are asking the question not because you didn't talk about it, but because they want to see how you kind of problem solve on the topic. Or maybe they believe that you glean over it too quickly and they want more detail about it, right? So try to understand why they're asking those questions instead of saying like, hey, instead of defaulting to thinking that, these people are not paying attention to what I'm talking about. Make sense? Another common obvious one is don't make assumptions. Don't assume that your listener understands the same thing that you understand. So try to elaborate, give context, talk about definitions, to make sure that everyone is on the same page instead of try to avoid using jargons as well, right? And the last piece of advice I can give around communication is be proactive about communication. You don't want to wait until people start to complain, because for every complaint that you receive, there are probably at least 10 other that go unvoiced. So if you are, running, let's say, a Kickstarter campaign, if there are issues, delays, or setbacks, things like this, not only with these kind of campaigns, but for anything, if there are any kind of problems, bring them up before people start to complain about it. Because the sooner you bring them up, the sooner you can kind of shift the expectation that people have, because people get disappointed when their expectations are not met. If you say that you're going to deliver by this date and it gets delayed, the expectations are not met, they get disappointed. But if you tell people about the delay before the date happens, then their expectation is shifting as well. Therefore, they don't get as disappointed. Make sense? So be proactive about bringing up issues, about seeking feedback as well. Right? Those are the key pieces of advice around this topic. And in the next episode, I think I'll talk a bit about, since we mentioned expectation, we'll go into kind of how to manage expectation, both with your customers, but also around using expectation as a tool to generate happiness and client satisfaction.